name is Kirk Liebecker, and I live in Portland, Oregon, and I work for Iwatta, Medea, and I'm an airbrush technician there. And this is the second time that I've been to one of the getaways with Cliff. The first time he rather liked my doing demonstrations on how to clean and maintain your airbrush, so they invited me back. Cleaning an airbrush is not a particularly difficult thing. There's a few things that you need to know about it that'll just simply make it easier for you to clean and maintain your airbrush. One of the things that I try and stress to people is that you should try as best you can not to spend too much time cleaning your airbrush. There isn't a lot of advantage to be gotten by preventive cleaning to it. What I recommend first off is I recommend that if you can, and very frequently you cannot, change colors judiciously. If you have a color like yellow and in your airbrush and you want to use orange again, there's almost no reason to do anything other than dump the paint out and put some more orange paint in. If you use orange and you want to go to red, again, the same thing. There's very little cleaning that needs to be done. The cleaning that you usually need to do happens when you're changing colors between something like yellow and violet, whereas one of those colors will definitely make a mess out of the other color. The other time that you really need to start doing a cleaning is if you notice that the performance of your airbrush is dropping. If you feel that it's bogging down, if you feel that you have to pull back farther on the trigger every time to get the paint to start, if it's giving you very poor performance, then is the time that you need to clean your airbrush. Okay. The first thing that I recommend is to take off the handle of the airbrush, set it someplace where it's not likely to roll onto the ground. The next thing that you'll want to do is that you'll want to remove the cap from the airbrush. These caps have a hole in them that's mostly there to vent air, so that you will want to have to clean that, but I'll do that here in a moment. The first thing that you need to do, though, is that you need to dump the paint that is in the airbrush out of the airbrush. Just give it a quick shake into a garbage can or something like that. The second thing that you'll need to do is to get rid of the paint that is already in the airbrush. And I strongly recommend that you do that by putting it into some sort of a clean out station. Press on the trigger and blow the excess air into the clean out. Once that's done, you can remove the needle, and I recommend that you make sure that your airbrush is the color cup is clean, or at least as clean as you can get it, before you pull the needle out, because sometimes what happens is that paint will leak back into the body of the airbrush. So pull the needle out, and I recommend that when you're doing this, that you wipe the needle from the back to the front. Always, 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 please always use it from the back to the front. If your paint has dried on there, the chances are that you'll probably need something a little bit stronger than a dry paper towel to clean it off. So I recommend a little bit of fingernail polish remover and a Q-tip. We really do not recommend that you run fingernail polish remover through the airbrush. It does not do that much good. You need to use the fingernail polish remover with something like a Q-tip, an interdental brush, or some sort of a brush to break up the paint and get it off. Okay. And I always recommend that you clean your airbrush from back to front. And there are certain things that I know that I can't tell you how I acquired that knowledge. And the back to front part is that this needle will actually redefine the word sharp to you when you stick it in your thumb by going like that. And just face it, I know that from my store of secret knowledge. Set the needle on a flat surface. What you really need to avoid is having it roll off onto the floor, because I think that the engineers at Iwatta had designed these things so that they will land point first, possibly in your foot. Okay. The second thing that you need to do to clean an airbrush is you need to get the paint out of the color cup and out of the channel that goes between the color cup and the tip of the nozzle. What happens is that very frequently you can do this without taking the airbrush apart. And the thing that I use for this is something called an interdental brush. You can get these interdental brushes at pretty much any drugstore. It's a small brush for people who've got bad teeth, like me, for instance. And what you want to do with this, well, prior to that, let's say, what you want to do is that you want to clean out the color cup as best you can using a little bit of fingernail polish remover, or you can use lacquer thinner. It's just that fingernail polish remover is easier to come by. And you can buy it by the 6-ounce bottle rather than the half-gallon. Clean that out. Wipe it out as best you can. Once you get that clean, you can see that there is a little bit of a hole that goes from the front of the color cup and it goes down into the base of the nozzle. Using an interdental brush dipped in a little bit of fingernail polish remover, you can slide that interdental brush down into the nozzle and clean that out without having to take the nozzle out of the airbrush. While you're doing this, you may notice, or you probably will notice, that paint starts coming out of the front of the airbrush. And you want to keep doing this, cleaning off your interdental brush every once in a while, until the liquid that starts coming out is going to start coming out without any paint in it. At that stage, you can pretty much bet that the airbrush is reasonably clean. Okay. At this stage, you can put your airbrush back together and, run some water through it to find out whether it is or is not working correctly. If, however, you find that even this does not make your airbrush work any better, you will have to take the nozzle out of the airbrush. For that, you remove the head cap, set it someplace where it's not likely to roll off onto the floor, and remove the nozzle. And I can see that this nozzle here still has quite a bit of paint in it that didn't seem to come out when I was using the interdental brush. So I'm going to clean that out the same way, just a little bit. Like that. And again, you'll probably start to see liquid coming out of the front of the nozzle. Now, there is another little trick that I actually do like, and that is that you can use an old needle to clean out the nozzles. The nozzles, the very tip of the nozzle is, it's difficult to get something in there without doing some damage to it. What I've done is taken an old needle that is no longer in use. I take a file and I use that file not to smooth the needle out, but to rake it so that it's got little tiny burrs in it so that it's fairly coarse. With that, I can take a little bit of the fuzz from the tip of a Q-tip, put that between my thumb and forefinger, like so, wrap the needle in there, and twist the needle until the needle picks up the cotton, like so. Now, by doing that, you've got essentially a long metal Q-tip that will allow you to get down into the nozzle of the airbrush. That part there's a little bit of crud that's starting to come out of there. In fact, there's a lot of stuff that's beginning to come out of there. And essentially what you need to do is you need to keep doing that until the Q-tip fuzz comes back clean. One of the things that I do recommend also is I recommend that you get an inexpensive jeweler's loupe. A jeweler's loupe is essentially an eyepiece that will allow you to look at, small parts of the airbrush. Put it up against your eye, and then you move the airbrush nozzle in and out until it comes into focus. And when you're looking at this, you should see that the tip of the nozzle is a clean, straight taper from back to front, that it's got a nice, clean, round tip to it, that it doesn't have any ragged edges, that it doesn't have any cracks in it, that it doesn't have any distortion to it. And the other thing that is very good to be able to do is to look down the back of a nozzle, because usually what you should be looking for is you should be looking at the inside walls of the nozzle to see if there is any dried paint on them still. And you put the jeweler's loupe up to your eye so that you're looking through the nozzle itself. And you should be able to see the walls as being relatively shiny. If you twist the nozzle between your thumb and forefinger and you see black splotches moving around as you're doing so, that means that there's still some dirt that's in there. If you see black splotches, but they stay in the same place even though you're twisting the nozzle back and forth, that's usually reflection, meaning that it's fairly clean inside there. Okay. Again, place the nozzle someplace where it's not likely to roll on the floor. I clean the cap, usually with on the outside of it. I clean the cap with just a Q-tip, a little bit of fingernail polish remover. For the inside of the cap, however, paint does build up in there from time to time, and one of the things that you'll notice is that it will seem like you're getting less and less air pressure going through your airbrush. So what I recommend for that is, again, a little bit more Q-tip on the end. Put that down through the cap. And see what comes out. And this one's coming out pretty clean, so it's time to put this thing back together. One of the other things that you can do with interdental brushes is you can use them to clean out the front part of the airbrush too, and mop the excess up with a Q-tip. Now, as I said, there's a small hole that is in the top of the cap that goes on this airbrush, and that has to be open because what happens is it's a vent hole to allow air in, so that as the paint escapes through the airbrush, it does not create a vacuum in there. And again, this little tool with a serrated end to it, and again, a little tiny bit of cotton fuzz. And clean out that hole. One of the other things that you should take into consideration, if your airbrush gets dirty, it is time to take the back part out of the airbrush. This is not much of a problem though. Pull the needle straight out and look to see if the pin that goes down into the body of the airbrush has got any kind of paint on it. If it does, I recommend that you clean your airbrush out with a little bit of a pipe cleaner and again fingernail polish remover. Push that down into that hole where that little piston goes, twist it around and see if you're getting liquid or getting paint coming out of there. If so, keep doing so until the pipe cleaner comes back relatively clean. You can also clean the insides of the airbrush with just a Q-tip. Again, a little bit of a pipe clean, Again, a little bit of fingernail polish remover. Looks like it's reasonably clean. And for the chuck mechanism, again, you only want to do this if you notice that you've got paint coming back into that trigger housing. That happens very infrequently. Put that chuck nut on loosely, set that aside. I also recommend that since you've got the trigger out, actually I only recommend this if you're having trouble with the way that the trigger works. If it feels real spongy going up and down, or if it goes down and tends to stick, or if it feels like it's real hard going down, I recommend putting a little bit of lubricant on the O-ring. And the best way to put the lubricant on the O-ring is not to put it on the base of the trigger. It's to put it on the butt end of a needle. Actually, you need just a very small amount of that. And there's a little hole that is straight down inside there. Can you see that? It's that little tiny hole that's
bring it down a little bit.
up like that.
The other way? Right. There you go. Perfect.
Okay. That little tiny hole that's down in there, that's where that little piston needs to go. It's a good idea to put a little bit of lubricant on the butt end of the needle, and then you twist it around and up and down so that you get the lubricant on the O-ring rather than, if it's a very stiff O-ring, all the lubricant will stay on top of the O-ring. To put the trigger in, hold that piston straight down and gently push it in. And you have to feel around until you catch that little hole. But you'll also notice that, when you do, you get a nice springy action to the trigger. Tilt that little auxiliary lever forward, push it in until it comes up behind the trigger, and screw in the chuck mechanism. Take the nozzle, put it on top of the airbrush, put the nozzle cap over the top of it, tighten it up. Use your wrench, not to reef on it, but you want to use the wrench to snug things up just a little bit, about like so. If you've noticed that you've had problems with the trigger in the back and forward motion to it, it is a good idea to put a little tiny bit of the super lube right where the taper of the needle starts. And I also recommend that you hold the trigger down when you insert the needle, because it may have popped up because of the spring that's underneath it, and you don't want to hit the trigger with the tip of the needle. Push the needle all the way through until you feel a nice positive stop to it. Lock it in place by twisting the needle chuck nut. And the other one that I do recommend when you get done with that is to spray some water through it. Usually if you're spraying water through it, you'll be able to tell whether the airbrush is working properly or not. And sometimes I recommend spraying it against a small piece of mirror. The thing that about spraying against a mirror is it becomes very obvious whether something is spraying correctly. Cap on top, put the handle on, and you're ready to go.